What's going on, YouTube? If you didn't know, Xbox just released their latest game, Senua Saga Hellblade 2, and it's brought up a very interesting conversation that we decided we wanted to talk about. So, if you didn't know, Senua Saga is a $50 game, and the runtime is coming out at about 5 hours of gameplay to beat the whole thing. And that has caused the internet to run amok with a conversation about, um, how many hours a game should have for the cost. And I'll just open it up to you, Patrick, with the question: do you think that we should be valuing games based on how much runtime they have?
Well, there's certainly an argument to be made for that. I think when it comes to Hellblade specifically, I think that's a very interesting example. If you go back and you look at the first one, and just briefly looking on how long to beat, not to bust your balls or anything, it has it listed as 6.5 if you're mainlining Hellblade 2, but that's still pretty short. That's shorter than the first game, which clocks in around 7.5 hours. And that game, looking on Steam, only costs about 30. And that was prior to Xbox purchasing Ninja Theory. They were still an indie developer at that point in time, so that stands to reason. That to me seems reasonable, but and I'm not going to sit here and say that the pricing for Hellblade 2 is reasonable. I think that probably should be cut down a little bit, but I also think that the trade-off, there's a little bit of a give and take when it comes to the the time of gameplay that you're paying a dollar for. Like I think when you get a game like Hellblade 2, I think it is more of an artistic piece, and I know this is, that's going to vary for how much mileage that gets. If that's worth 50 bucks
For
to you,
sure.
I don't know. But that game is, just from everything I've heard, looks gorgeous, has the same kind of audio from the first one. Just everything from a presentation standpoint is really good. Does that make up for the lack of any amount of gameplay? I don't know. But I do know that this debate has been as old as whenever the Order 1866 came out. So,
I was gonna bring that one up too. Yeah,
hmm
that's the most. Well, the first one I can remember the same exact conversation. I mean, it was basic,
hmm
another party exclusive, big, pushing the boundaries of video, like what you can do fidelity wise. And
hmm
and it came in at 5 hours, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's kind of an issue."
yeah, because that launched at full price, right?
I believe so, yeah.
That's what I was
And
looking up beforehand.
I think so. Here's the thing for me: there's a couple of interesting pieces that come into play here.
hmm
One, Senua Saga is not the same thing as WoW. And so being like, I'm going to compare video games and their cost to the amount of time that you have is so variable because of what a video game is so
hmm
variable. And so that's kind of hard. And then the other piece is, depending on who you are considering here, not everyone can buy a ton of games in a year, right? Most people don't just have free cash flow to spend all this money all the time.
hmm
And that is, I think, where the, argument about time versus cost comes in. But
Sure. Yeah.
you can have the opposite, right? I mean, we have plenty of things, like the one that comes to my head, and it may not be memorable for most people, but is the Mad Max game that came out on
Mm,
the last gen, which was
yeah.
basically just like a map full of quest points that meant nothing. Like, go do this same task over and over again. Go do this thing, go do that thing, That, even though they would cost, I mean, it probably cost $60, but it cost $60 and you had whatever, um, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of gameplay, depending on how you want to quantify
hmm
that, didn't mean it's a better game, right? Doesn't mean it's gonna be worthwhile more to you. I think the interesting part that comes into this is for specifically Hellblade 2, which I'm not going to talk too much about because I haven't played the game, but from what I've seen, they didn't do much to add to the game other than continue what they did before and look really good, which they did before, but using the next
hmm
gen experience. And so people went, okay, you had a longer game the first time. You have basically the same gameplay. You spent 5 years, and all we got was 5 hours with very little, of anything else, which I think kind of is part of what plays into this.
Hmm.
But again, I also can't hate on people for being like, I can only spend and I can only buy 2 games in a year. And if I go play Fortnite, which costs me nothing, I can play forever, right? Like in theory, you
Right.
could play that game forever. So
Hmm.
I don't even really know where to land on if you should or shouldn't be, valuing it that way.
Right. Yeah. They the now defunct Funhouse channel back when they first started had a series where one of their members had a line of thinking where if a game can entertain you for however many, like it was hours per dollar spent on the game, then it was worth his time. And they quickly debunked that because, like, you have freaky, standout examples like Elden Ring where I paid $70 for that. I probably did play that for around 70 hours, but no more than that. But then you also have games that are like, I'm not going to be able to think of a good example right now, but like maybe a Crash Bandicoot game where you paid like $30. You're not playing that game for 30 hours.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I've always been of the opinion because like you do bring up a good point where not everyone has unlimited budget where they can just buy whatever games they want. They got to be a little bit more selective. So like this week we have Hellblade 2 dropping, but we also have Paper Mario, almost 20-year-old game at this point, but that game is like 50 hours long. You're only paying $60 for it, which for some might be a better return on investment, and that's another really good game. But it really depends, I guess, what you value more. I think if you have the funds, if you don't have Game Pass, I think Hellblade 2 is a higher ask because it is launching at $50. And on one hand, I understand why it is that, but at the same time, it's like you're getting, yeah, not a whole lot of gameplay out of that. So I do see why people are upset about it, but I don't get super upset from that. Even if I didn't have Game Pass, I probably would have passed on it, just forgot about it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I don't know.
I think as
It, yeah.
there's a super interesting example here that I just thought of with The Last of Us. So, The Last of
Hmm.
Us 1 and The Last of Us 2 cost the same amount at when they
Right.
launched. Now, they're both considered really great games depending on who you talk to. Obviously, Last of Us 2 is a little bit more controversial, but
Yeah.
I would say that one of the big gripes that people have had with The Last of Us 2 is it feels like it's 1/3 too long
Hmm.
for, like I said, the same cost. So, same gameplay, essentially, same characters, a continuation of the story. But in the latter example, they kind of bloated it. And in this case, I'm sure um, they would say it was for story reasons because it's not like there's a multiplayer version, gameplay or anything like that.
Right.
But I actually think that it really hurt them. And that's where being like, yeah, just adding content just to add content so you have more is totally not worth it. So there's got to be a middle ground here, right? I mean, we got to agree that
Yeah.
Hellblade 2 is probably too short for the cost. Um,
Hmm.
if you are, the type of person who has a limited budget and it's really more like you said of an artistic piece. So I like it's owned by Xbox, it's gonna be in Game Pass, but I don't think it's meant to be a mass market game in the same way.
No, I'd agree.
To where I can be like, if the story was good, I actually don't think it's that horrible of a price, which might be
Hmm.
a bad take to most people, but I just think that the
Yeah.
the issue is that the story doesn't do what people thought, and it was just kind of like the rest of it was just okay. And so they're pointing to the length as the thing to be mad about. But there's a middle ground to be had of like, yes, you should have some length to your game, but ultimately, what is the game? Is the game actually good? You know, like I don't like WoW.
Hmm.
So if I spent $20 a month or whatever it is for WoW every month and, it has hundreds of hours, but I don't like it, that's not worth it to me either. So,
Right. And I think, yeah, it ultimately comes down to what you quantify, what you value, what you look for. Like I know there are a lot of people just not last October, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 dropped. They were saying not a lot of post-game content, not a whole lot to do in this game once you're done with the story. First one had more to do, and while factually they're correct, and they were getting upset over this $70 game that they paid for, that I paid for, and it didn't seem to have enough content. And then I look on how long to beat. It's listed main story 17 hours, completionist, which is everything, 28 hours, which yes, is less than the first one. But at the same time, by the end of my time with Spider-Man 2, I'm like, I'm ready to move on. You know? So I think, well, arguments for games like The Order 1866 or Hellblade 2 have some validity to them. I also think that some people are just overreacting for no good reason. But I also think there are games on the other side of the spectrum, like you brought this up, like you mentioned The Last of Us 2. I'd even bring up the newest Final Fantasy 7 game. Might be a little bit too much bloat to it. That's what a lot of criticism at that game was about. And Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Super massive. A lot of people didn't finish that game because it's so big. So yeah, there's got to be a middle ground. I think, Hellblade 2 and, The Order fall on one side of it. And I think certainly you could add a little bit more. But at the same time, I don't think that's the kind of game Hellblade 2 is. Does that mean you should lower the price? Maybe eventually. I think 50 is a little high, but knowing that this is like the first big Unreal Engine 5 game from Xbox, and they took 7 years, well, a little less than 7 years to make it, like I can justify it. I can see why they're justifying it.
Well, and I would say, are you willing to accept a lower fidelity game? Because that's what you have to get. If you want them to charge
Right.
less, you have to expect less as well in that case.
Yeah. And jumping back to Spider-Man 2, that was, reports came out. I think it was the Insomniac leaks where they were talking about, or just different Sony, releases. They were saying how Spider-Man 2 cost a lot of money to make, and just there's a whole lot of scuttlebutt about it just being a pain in the ass to make, and there's a lot going on with that. And it brought up the question, if these games aren't profitable, are we going to get a Spider-Man 3? Are we going to get an eventual Insomniac X-Men game? Like the leak said. It's a good question. It's something we need to talk about. Do we want lower fidelity games? Do we need something that's like 4K with ray tracing, DLSS, all that fancy pantsy shit? Like, I don't personally. I think if the gameplay's there, if the story's there, if what I'm doing is fun for me and what I value, I'll pay whatever it takes. Not whatever it takes, but within a reasonable amount.
You heard it here first. He wants them to raise game cost to $80.
Yeah. Tears of the Kingdom. Good pricing.
I don't have anything else on that, do you?
No, I think people are getting a little overreactive about this Hellblade 2 situation. I think Xbox should also lower the price by like $5-10. But that's it. That's where I'm at.
Well, I think we're both in the camp that it's probably a little bit of an overreaction. Other than, what do you guys think? Let us know in the comment. I'm sure everyone has a lot to say about this one. Let us know. And we'll obviously be there to defend our opinions in the comments.
Civil about it too.
Oh, for sure. If you like what we do around here, go ahead and give us a subscribe. We stream on Mondays and Fridays, as well as lots of content like this, gameplay, movies, all sorts of stuff. Other than that, have a good rest of your day.